Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the CDP Growth Show. On today's episode, I'm joined by Daniel, who is the current Chief Growth Officer at Ebsta. Daniel, how you doing?
Very good, Joe. Under the circumstances, very good. And
Awesome.
It's a pleasure to join you today.
Awesome, yeah. So before we kind of, dive kind of into the main part of the kind of podcast, just give the audience like a really, really quick, 30-second rundown of, first of all, what Ebsta is as a platform, and then really kind of who the platform's for.
So Ebsta is a customer engagement platform, helping more than 1,000 B2B businesses around the world now build better customer relationships. So we're typically working with CMOs, VPs of sales, giving them better insight into who they know and giving them the tools to build those better relationships.
Got it. Makes sense. And, something that, that I really kind of like asking my guests is kind of a first question, just to kind of give the audience context, right, for kind of, how you got into the world of SaaS. Like, kind of walk us through like a brief timeline of kind of how you got into the SaaS space. I mean, have you always been in B2B, or have you kind of transitioned out of B2C?
So I actually joined Ebsta 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And initially started as a product manager. And then as the business has grown, taken on more responsibility, really sat at the heartbeat of what the business is doing. So understanding what the customer needs, communicate it back out. And that's just evolved into really now sitting as the Chief Growth Officer.
Got it. Okay. So have you been at Ebsta since they kind of first started? I mean, have you been there pretty much since day one, or have you kind of joined as they've been grown?
Yes, I wouldn't go as far as to say it was an idea on a piece of paper. And the two co-founders, Zach and Guy, had a very early product.
Yeah.
A little sidebar tool in Internet Explorer, and a handful of clients. So there was early product traction, but it's certainly a very different business now to what it was when I first joined.
Yeah. And I think something that, again, would be interesting for the audience to hear. Obviously, we've got a lot of early stage founders that, that listen to the show. So I think what would be really interesting to touch on is both how you've kind of, built up that kind of inbound growth engine, and also kind of maybe touching on the kind of ABM piece. So first of all, kind of, starting with the kind of inbound piece. I know you guys have tapped into things like, the Salesforce App Exchange. So I'd be interested to hear how you've, really, use different things to really help you kind of get that inbound engine going.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ebsta is proudly a bootstrap business, and started life really focusing on the core problem for businesses, which was CRM had positioned itself at the heart of every organization. It had all of the customer information, had all of the activities, had all of the reporting. It was consistently undermined by poor data and a lack of engagement from end users. And so the whole thing came crashing down. So we obsessively focused on that problem. And we built out tools by understanding the users that really brought the CRM to wherever they wanted to work. Whenever you think of CRM as a user, you think admin, or the stick I'm going to be beaten with. So we built out plug and play tools that solve that particular need, allowing users to install it themselves in 10 seconds, and it proved the value.
Got it.
As a quick and free offering. Now, we iterated through that early version. We failed a number of times, to be quite honest. And eventually launched it on the Salesforce App Exchange, which is very much like the App Store for the iPhone, with about 2,000 or 3,000 other providers. And we offered initially a LinkedIn integration, allowing users to cross-reference Salesforce from LinkedIn. But it didn't quite work. And what we did in the early stages is we over-invested in the early users. And I was on calls all day, all night, trying to understand what was really working. And we blended some of that direct feedback with some of the stats that we saw in the product, things that were otherwise invisible to us.
Yeah.
And very quickly, we identified that users were spending most of their time in Gmail.
Yeah.
And so we continued to iterate the product to a point that it became addictive.
Got it. Yeah.
So these early users really saw the value, focused on a very specific pain. And by launching on the App Exchange, you were now capturing the right audience, the right market, in an environment where people were looking for solutions.
Yeah.
So we had very little traffic to our own website in the early days, but because we had a tool which piggybacked on the success of the App Exchange and the Chrome Web Store, when people were looking for a Gmail integration, our profile is really high, really highly optimized, really relevant. So you're going to where your early users, your prospects, your customers are looking for solutions.
Yeah.
And as I say, we optimized the particular pages. It was very relevant. And through that first iteration, we consistently explored different ways to really scale it.
Got it.
So we played around with the terms, the listing. We tracked the number of visitors to the listing.
Yeah.
Straight from the early start. But what we did is we built a community and we reduced the time to value. We reduced a lot of the barriers there. Okay.
Makes sense.
Just to get the traction, just to get the momentum. So we offered it for free for the first 3 users. Yeah. So now we had a lot of hits. Yeah. We drove all traffic to download the product directly from the App Exchange. So they saw a lot of people clicking on it.
Yeah.
We incentivized our users to provide feedback. So now we had a community.
Got it.
And credibility.
Yeah.
And the whole thing just really started to self-perpetuate from there.
Got it. Got it.
And it built us up to a point where we were the #1 app globally on the Salesforce App Exchange.
Wow. For
2.5 years. So for a small bootstrap business based in London, it was very much like sipping from a fire hose, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We had hundreds of installs every day from different companies around the world. And that really gave us the foundation and built our brand to be well recognized within the ecosystem. And building that community in the early days, focusing on the pains and taking your solutions to where users are spending their time and reducing the time to value, reducing the barriers for people to see the value you provide was essential.
Got it. Makes sense. And was this kind of in the early stages of Ebsta? Like, was this when you did this launch, or was this just a few years ago, or to kind of give the audience?
Yeah, great point. Great point. So this was within 12 months of really the inception of Ebsta. So this is back to 2013, 2014, when we initially did it. And as I say, we retained that position for 2.5 years into 2016, 2017, where, of course, you get a lot more competition, the market shifts, of course. And you have to keep adapting. But by building a great product that added value, over-investing in the early adopters and building that community, that really gave us the necessary traction in those early days.
And because I guess, what advice would you give to someone? Obviously, it's, just in terms of that particular App Exchange, that's obviously become a lot more competitive now over the last few years. And, it's with all things, they do get more competitive over time. But, what advice would you give to, maybe a new SaaS startup that's thinking of launching these kind of like micro, programs and stuff that they can offer to, to customers? What advice would you give around, kind of creating them and really making sure that they are of real value, to their user base?
Yeah, I think, the benefit for me is I'm born out of product more than anything else. And I think with that, you've got to take a very, very iterative and lean approach. And if people haven't read it already, Lean Startup is probably the Bible in that regard. But it's proving through the concept as quickly as possible. You don't have to lock yourself away, overinvest in something, pop up on the other side and go, ta-da, I'm here, I've got it. What you need to do is get closer to those users, get into the communities, right? Start looking at the forums online, the different blogs, follow some of the influencers. Get, obviously in a COVID-19 world, it's hard to go out to the meetups and stuff like that, but there's still ample opportunity to get closer to your users than ever before. Do that obsessively and ask them quite honestly, this is what I've got. Is this what you're thinking? What does it solve? What problems is it addressing? How much would you pay for it? Would you be an early adopter? And get those guys on board. So don't necessarily design to have 1 million users from day one. Design just to have 100 users and work iteratively through it. So get those guys on board, learn an awful lot, overinvest in them, make them feel special, because they will be the mouthpiece that really catapults you into a new business that's got traction and a degree of credibility. So in summary, I think iterate through the early stages of validating your proposition, build out a community from day one, overinvest in that community, and then just start working on establishing who your ideal customer is, the adjacent businesses that are similar to the ones that are using your tools, and start targeting them, and lead with very simple propositions. Hey Joe, do you have 5 minutes? I'm currently helping competitor A with these problems, and I really think I could help you with some of these challenges. Do you have some time? And I think it's that authentic, honest and personal approach that will really give you a sound foundation, a springboard to build upon.
And I think it was an interesting point you made there about not trying to build for, there's so many startups now that are expecting that they're going to have 1 million users or, however many users within, X amount of time, when actually if they just built for the first 10 users, never mind the first 100, right, or the first 1,000, and like you said, taking that step-by-step iterative approach, I think is always the best way, rather than trying to shoot for the sky, right, and try and build for, some users that you might not have for, a few years, right? So I think it's a really, really important point, especially for early stage founders.
And it's something we've just baked in, it's a feedback loop. I come from the world of running sprints with engineers and developers. But I think you need to apply that approach to everything you do. I agree. Lead with a hypothesis, run a test for a period of time, conclude on it, and then go again.
Makes sense. And now kind of, obviously that's the kind of focusing more on the inbound engine. I know you guys have also been quite big on the ABM side, with different ABM launches. I'd be really, really interested here, I'm sure the audience will as well, around how you've really structured that ABM program, and maybe, how kind of high touch the program is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So really just building on the story of Ebsta and our evolution. Just to provide that context for everyone. So we had the success of the plug and play tool, end users, light touch, freemium. And that world changed, and it changed like it does for all of us. Unfortunately, you can't rest on your laurels in this world. And what we saw is that Salesforce offered their own tools, there were free offerings, and there was, if you totaled it up, we almost got to the point you couldn't do 30, 40 other providers. So we switched our proposition. And we launched a new product, and it was called Ebsta Team. And what that did was it allowed companies to consolidate all of their customer data from inboxes, calendars, telephony systems, and automatically route that into Salesforce.
Got it.
Giving them better visibility. So now we evolved as a business from, you've got somebody in your business development team using a particular tool, to actually now you need to engage with the C levels, and propose your offering as a solution that will have an impact company-wide and really move the needle on some fundamental metrics within that organization. And, you know, we're often referred to as, you know, to almost like a bit like an internal LinkedIn, because we pull that data together and give you insight into what's going on, who you know, how well you know them. And for us, that meant we had to grow up in a lot of ways and think about a very different approach, account-based selling, account-based marketing. And a lot of that really got to the point where you had to really understand who you're targeting. Really understand them. And build out an ICP that's always being scrutinized. You have to then be a lot more specific around the verticals you want to target, and the industries, the locations, all of those elements, because you can't spread yourself too thin. And the reason is you've got to deliver a hyper-personal, relevant message to them. And you can't be one size fits all.
Of course.
Certainly not in those early days. So we started to analyze early traction around that, and B2B SaaS was just the obvious front runner. And so with that, we just built messaging that targeted those individuals. So we did a lot of paid campaigns, talking about quantifiable ways that we can move the needle. But we also leveraged the proven case studies that we've had, just to build the credibility and brand awareness. And that helped to a certain point, and you can obsessively work on the click-through rate, but it didn't necessarily give us access to who we wanted to speak to. It didn't start that conversation. And we continued to run those campaigns, but we took a different approach as well, which is we want to be a business that adds value to the market and builds a community.
Of course.
And it just starts self-perpetuating from there. So we started to analyze some of our data and distribute that. We created surveys to get engagement with some of the C-levels, to get their opinions on things that mattered. That gave us a lot of data to then propose back a more tailored approach, because they've told us what their pains are, what their needs are, what their immediate priorities are. And so you can build on that to really sell your proposition in a way that adds value, but you're there to advise. And we also kicked off our podcast series, Sales Ops Demystified, 12 months ago, just to target specific people, give them the pedestal, start a conversation. And that has allowed us to build up the relationships directly with some of those key companies, be very, very, very targeted with our approach. Build a cornerstone where we now understand those individuals and their pains in more detail before we then branch out and try and tailor our message to them. And that has had an incredible amount of success for us. That sort of targeted approach, finding the individuals, building out data and statistics, and probing them to see what really matters. That's had great success for us. And that's coupled with also the product experience, which we've made it as easy as possible to share it internally. So when you are trying to get different stakeholders involved, we have a philosophy of showing and not telling. And so built out of that zero touch or light touch philosophy, we wanted the product just to work out of the box. And so we can start a conversation, we have a message, we targeted these accounts through the ads, through the podcast. We had the product which would then spread and provide the stats, and then our sales guys would be methodically working through with cadences to just nurture those relationships, always leading with value, just trying to start a conversation. And it starts with emails and calls and meetings. I think calls are the way forward. A lot of reps are typically very shy from making calls, but calls work very well. And then you start adding layers to that. And more recently, we've introduced video as a core component to that.
Yeah.
Again, based on that personalized approach, but also it also shows and doesn't tell. You can see what we're about, you can see who we are, and I think it's a bit more inviting to businesses to then engage from that point.
And obviously, because this obviously is a heavily kind of focused tech stack podcast where we're talking about the marketing tech that you guys have got in place and the different softwares. Obviously, the ABM software space has just rocketed over the last few years, right? With softwares like Terminus and lots of different ABM softwares that offer different things. I mean, have you guys tapped into any of these softwares, or has it really just been using your own CRM and just kind of integrating everything around that, or have you used some of these kind of popular ABM softwares?
Yeah, great question. Great question. The wonderful world of tech stacks, which for us at Ebsta, the tech stack that I inherited was somewhat convoluted, and hadn't really evolved with us as a business and our proposition. And so we had a simple approach, which was we need to keep it as simple as possible. We need to really cut it back. So we haven't invested hugely in some of those more advanced tools, because I still consider us to be in the early stages, iterative stages. But what we have at the moment is Salesforce as a CRM is a cornerstone element. And it's something we invested in very early, not just because they're a partner, but because it gives us the flexibility we needed to customize it. We've got Pardot as a marketing automation engine. And we've also introduced a number of other tools, but we also have Ebsta as a core component in all of that.
Makes sense.
Where Ebsta's got a CDP component by mapping all of the relationships and tying them all together. We've got cadences, so now we can automate the workflow straight off different insights that we have into those customers. And more recently, we started to add more to it, to our tech stack. But we've got more insight into product usage. We use tools like Pendo. So now we can blend. I always consider product usage to be a sign of intent, often ignored by a lot of marketers because it's, marketing is often regarded as top end of the funnel, and post conversion, it tends to blur somewhat. But what we've done by design is extended the insight we can get from prospects into the product.
Got it.
And the more they use it, specific things they're using just validates again their intent. Down to, how good is your tool at solving particular use cases or needs. So that's really at a high level what we've got in place. And then more recently, we've just bolted on lighter tools to add fuel to the fire, increase the efficiency of specific things. So you've got Intercom, you've got Chili Piper, you've got Vidyard for videos, and that's what it currently looks like.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. And obviously, you will have seen, growing Ebsta itself, a lot of challenges when trying to scale the tech stack, or maybe you've added a software in that didn't fit quite right, or maybe just what you've seen with other companies where you've worked at them, or people that in the kind of space. Because obviously we've got a lot of early stage founders that listen, and I think a challenge that they tend to run into that's usually created by themselves, right? Where it's they go and buy 25 different softwares that they didn't need, when actually if they just figured out how to use 5 or 10 really well, they wouldn't have needed them 25 different softwares, right? So what have been some challenges that you've seen? Maybe you added too many softwares too quickly, or just some things that that you think you could kind of help other founders avoid.
That really is a great question. The interesting thing is we help 1,200 companies, as I mentioned before now. with their sales and marketing tech stacks. We're woven into that. So I've seen all sorts of horror stories, and a few incredible success stories, and also felt the pain internally. The one thing I would honestly say here is that you have to lead with a strategy. What is your intention? What matters? What do you need to measure? How are you going to be interacting with your audience? And I think the pillars around all of that is a CRM tool, most likely an email marketing tool. There's a wealth of free tools available anyway over and above that to validate whether you really need solutions like this, to dip your toe into the water and work from there. The thing I consistently see is that sales and marketing tech companies are exceptional at selling their solutions. And it's really easy to get sold on the benefits and think you're going to get immediate results just by having this new tool added into your tech stack. But again, the reality is the tech stack is just a series of tools to assist and elevate your marketing. You've got to start from a very simple strategy, and then you've got to iterate through. And the problem is, people are often sold on tools. They may be inheriting tools. There's a lack of ownership internally as to who's responsible for them. And when those individuals leave, because everyone comes with their preferred tools, you end up in a very short period of time with somewhat of a quagmire, something that just needs a colossal amount of time just to unpick it. So certainly for the early founders, but also any business, keep it as simple as possible. And find free alternatives to validate whether you need tools in line with what you're thinking. Don't just jump on the next big hype, if you were, right? Because these have to be things that stand the test of time. They demonstrate their value, and you will find that you're either adding new tools into your tech stack or you're buying better tools to do the same things, more advanced tools, as you start to scale up and grow up. So I think it's just very important to have that very clear strategy. If you're a business owner, maybe in the short term, you're responsible for that. But be mindful that whenever you bring somebody in to lead the growth of your business, whether it's a CMO, a CGO, something along those lines, that there's an alignment with what the intentions are within the business. And anything that's introduced is well documented. So if that individual, for whatever reason, was to leave, you're not now inheriting a tech stack that can't really
be used.
And that becomes incredibly painful. So despite the temptation, despite all of these quick fixes and 10x promises on the horizon, start simple. Your business is unique. You need to validate what works yourself, and then build from that core understanding.
I completely agree. I think people, particularly early stage founders, they see this golden world of MarTech and all these different softwares that they can add in, and it very quickly kind of convolutes the stack, and it becomes very confusing very quickly. And I think, again, to the point of kind of poor documentation, I think as you're scaling up your team, if everyone's not on the same page about how to use the different softwares, it's not only is the stack a mess, but it's how people are actually using the softwares that becomes the issue as well, because people are just not on the same page.
And absolutely, Joe. Great point, because one of the other problems is that there's oftentimes a lack of accountability on the other side, where you're buying in these tools and then you don't really think, who's going to be using them? I bought them to do this, but it's too technical. I don't want to deal with that. So that's somebody else. And all of a sudden they turn around and go, do I really need it? And I think that often catches a lot of businesses off guard as well. And when you're signing up to some of these tools for a year, 2 years, 3 years potentially, because of the length of that commitment, sometimes they just tend to blur into the status quo. And then you go, well, of course we need it. It's been here so long.
Yeah.
But then you turn around and go, well, sorry, can you get your marketing team together and go, can somebody put their hand up and say, who's actually using this?
Using it. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because you won't miss it.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting exercise in itself. So if you're a bit further down the line, maybe the first thing you do now is go, is anyone using this?
Yeah. And it's even saying, is anyone using this? And, is anyone actually using this efficiently? Is it, if we are using it, is it actually playing an important role, or is it just creating more mess and more, chaos, in the kind of friction in the strategy?
Yeah, and what you tend to have with that, a lot of these tools are starting to branch out themselves. So there's a lot of overlap now.
Yeah.
With some of the features.
Yeah.
They, as they get bigger and clunkier and more complex, they're starting to blur into other tools.
All the same. Yeah.
And that causes problems as well. So keeping it simple, keeping it focused, measuring the performance of them, and finding best-in-class tools for what they're known for, what they're good for, is really the best approach.
And then I know you mentioned that, obviously I'd say over the last few years, the kind of whole CDP has become quite an important role in the stack. Now, I know you guys have you've got your own element within Ebsta of a CDP, because you've got kind of that more, higher kind of high touch model. So I'd be interested to kind of get your perspective around CDP and really how you've kind of created an alternative, if that makes sense, and really your overall take on CDP.
Absolutely. So I actually read a recent report by Salesforce, which suggested that by 2025, the average company will have more than 40 data sources.
It's crazy.
On any particular customer.
Yeah.
And and this isn't going to slow down. There's just more and more information. And there's a trend now towards building those hyper-personalized experiences, and as businesses are introducing them, it's becoming the new norm.
Yeah.
The pressure is that this is now the expectation. And if you're not delivering hyper-personalization, then you're not even going to survive. And so it's essential to tie all of that data together, all of that insight. And that's why I think a CDP is fast becoming an essential component. To give those insights. My perspective is quite interesting, and at Ebsta we've, as you alluded to, we've built our own version. And it's probably worth explaining a little why. Because the CDPs that we've seen, the customers we've spoken to have gone, well, they're great for light touch or high volume transactional businesses, e-commerce, for example. And enterprises tend, at the other end of the spectrum, tend to like to just tie all of their data sources together. But many of our clients who are in B2B really struggle with CDPs because it doesn't deliver that high touch approach, personalized approach. It can route data from one place to another. It can trigger alerts or notifications. It can send out an email. It facilitates more automation. But there needs to be a blend between the insights you have and making them actionable, where individuals within your sales and customer success teams are able to leverage that insight immediately and take action and deliver on that. And I think it's that specific element that's oftentimes missing. Right, CDP's routing it through automations, triggers, notifications, brilliant, right? And there's a lot of great tools for that. But the unique approach that we've taken at Ebsta is we want to use a CDP to give you greater understanding of your prospect or customer, wherever they are in the life cycle, analyze the signals that really matter. And when certain things occur, that information is routed through to the user to take better action or a more personalized approach when they're dealing with that action. Or it's just automating steps that are integrated into the user's workflow. So what we do is we track engagement. So we know if the relationship is tailing off, which is a critical part for B2B businesses, when it's all about account-based selling and building up relationships with multiple stakeholders.
Yeah.
When that relationship drops, you need a way to proactively deal with it.
Engage.
And that could be an email call, whatever it may be. So we analyze that data and we route it through to a user where their workflow's already created for them and the right message is being sent out, or the right task is being prioritized. So what we're doing is looking at sales and marketing teams, their workflows, their activities, being an extension of marketing, and being closer to what the customer's doing, what the prospect's doing, and then taking decisive action and leveraging the individuals you have within your organization to lead with that personalized approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, again, one thing you just mentioned there is, I think what we are going to start to see a lot more of is, if a prospect's falling off or they're struggling with one part, they're using the software and one feature they're not quite getting a grip of. I think even though that sales and marketing touch is really, really important, I think as maybe kind of more product marketers, as we can really help the prospect adapt the product by just seeing what they're doing inside the software rather than having that constant back and forward engagement of the marketing and sales. I think that's going to be really, really important to actually adapt the software as they're going. And if they're struggling with one point, it's not always a case of just sales reaching out, right, and having to help them adjust or make change. I think the product team is also going to become a really, really important piece of the overall marketing kind of side.
Absolutely. And I think whether you call it marketing or product, it's about the value that you're providing to a customer. And what I tend to spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about with our own customers, trying to crack the code internally, is you can't have siloed departments focused on specific parts. The customer is not, we're moving away from the idea of there being a funnel and just routing people from one stage to the other. The fact is, an individual can move fluidly between any of those stages at any moment in time. And you need to understand that it's a customer life cycle and it's a bit like a loop. You take people on personalized journeys where they may go back and forth to the point they ultimately, ideally, spend money with you. But then that doesn't stop. It doesn't now suddenly become, I've, sort of clean your hands, done clear. Right? How do you ensure that you retain them? How do you grow that account? How do you expand that account? And that's why it has to bleed through everything that you do, right? You bring people in, you leverage the insights you have across all of the marketing, more traditional stuff, the product usage, and the engagement that your sales and customer success teams are having with that individual to give them the optimal experience. And then you just continue channeling that through, because they're always at a point in time with your organization. There's no handoff, there's no passover, there's no now they're converted even to it. The best in class businesses are treating it like customer life cycles. And they're finding ways to continue to add value that's really relevant to that individual at that moment in time.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's why having that kind of centralized point, whether it is, a tool like you guys or a CDP, whatever, wherever you're storing this kind of data, having that centralized point where you can see, all these different points of intent, whether they've done, they've logged onto the software or they've used X feature. I think it's really, really important to be constantly up to date with, each little micro engagement or micro bit of intent that a certain prospect or current customer is showing at all points, and not just treating it as, like you said, one a linear funnel, because it's not how it works. It's all non-linear in terms of some people might go back and some people might go forward, and it's a constant kind of game of seeing where the prospect is, right?
And you absolutely need to tie it together with the longer term view as well. I think that's one of the really exciting things here as well. We're not just driving automation and transactional experiences and optimizing open rates or click rates and things like that. You're looking at whether the cohorts that you're building lead to an increase in retention, an increase in engagement, with that individual over the longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to also see what impacts that has on revenue.
Yeah.
Are certain series, is a certain process, is a certain approach leading to more revenue? Is it leading to shorter sales cycles? What's really moving the needle? And I think the opportunities afforded to us now is we're not just triggering automation with better information like we discussed at the top end. We're also looking at the wider impact over the longer term. So it's essential you have access to as much of this information as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But you also need to understand why you're doing what you're doing, so you understand the longer term impact it can have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, everything has to be tied to an outcome. You can't. Yeah, you've got to always understand that by tracking certain points and by implementing certain processes that it's going to lead to some kind of outcome. Yeah, really. Like you said, everything has to be tracked. So yeah, completely agree. And on the kind of point, I guess, of long term, and just I guess how the whole, over with this whole kind of COVID situation, right? I feel like we're really starting to see quite a big shift in how kind of the whole space is operating. You're seeing everyone and their grandma now has got a webinar, and everyone is emailing you with the lots of digital events. And I mean I'd be really interested to kind of get your perspective around how you personally see the world shifting over the next few months, in terms of, are we gonna post COVID, are we going to move to a much more kind of digital world of, and see certain industries that maybe were just trade shows and 95% physical before, now move into this digital world? Do you think we're going to see a big shift, or is this just going to be just in this kind of period of time?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes without saying that we're living in a period which is unprecedented. And we are, I believe, merely at the start of something we'll regard in later years as a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it's a shift like we haven't seen before, because it's changing behavior.
Yeah.
It's not just the economic implications, it's actually the fact that people are acting, working in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And some of these shifts that would otherwise take a generation, remote working and things like that, or digital conferences, has actually happened in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And it's almost a case of business Darwinism in the short term.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's been somewhat polarizing. But I think whenever you look at these sorts of shifts, they create huge opportunity. And technology is the primary driver of change, always.
Yeah.
And the winners through this situation, if that's the appropriate term, but the ones that are destined to thrive are the ones that leverage the technology and they innovate fast.
Yeah. Agree.
And many businesses now should be hitting reset. You don't have to shake your organization down to the core, but you have to just reassess who you're targeting, what's going on in their world, where can you add value, and how can we be more creative with delivering that value? How can we find a way that's easier, cheaper, faster to demonstrate that value? And I think so much of it then is tied to the relationships that you can build with these individuals. So in the short term, with COVID-19 and full-blown crisis mode, if you genuinely believe you can help, show them. Right. And as I say, make it as easy as possible. I'm seeing some great companies starting to really change their commercial models, offering things for free, right? Offering, core components to users for an extended period of time. And I think that really builds that trust, stronger relationships, which will see you through over the longer period. Relationships are more important than ever before. and demonstrating value and building trust and utilizing what you have available to do that is essential. So I think in the short term, seeing businesses approach it in that way is really interesting. I think more specifically on marketing, we've seen it move from maybe a department to the business as a whole. And it's more, rather than it being vertical, it's horizontal. And we're mobilizing everyone within the business to be an extension of the marketing department, building relationships, showing value, and carving out their own stories to their own audiences that resonate. And I believe also we're seeing more businesses pivot to what I would regard as an inside-out growth model. Rather than chasing new business and pipeline at the top end, it's actually a case of building out organically within, iterating the value proposition, adding more features potentially to your tools, taking customers on a journey to see that value, to grow with your solutions, lighter users to upgrade to your premium solutions, building out the case studies, the communities, the word of mouth, and then extending that into the market at the latter part rather than chasing it prematurely. So I think I think a lot of the behavior will change with people. Working remotely will be a bigger thing. And connecting to brands, businesses, individuals through technology will be accepted. In fact, preferred for many. And I think because of the shift in behavior, you'll see a lot of businesses having to pivot to that digital element. But at the same time, this isn't, as you alluded to before, a case of just produce loads of content and pump it out, right? You can't compromise really the personalization, the relevancy to individuals. And that's where you have to start with who are we targeting, how can we add value, how can we help them, what do they need, and offer that first.
I think there's definitely a danger of people just trying to innovate and kind of both on the product side and also on the marketing side, just trying to innovate for the sake of innovating, because everyone on LinkedIn is saying that you've got to innovate now because, we're in this whole new world. And I think, even though it is important, like you said, to hit that reset button and to kind of assess, what is now important in the customer's world, you have got to be careful that you've, not just innovating and not just creating new, experiences or new, product features because, that's what everyone else is doing, right? I think it's important, like you said, to just understand what the customer wants and what they're going through right now and kind of level with them, rather than just, speeding ahead and just, like I said, innovating and pushing out content on the marketing side for the sake of pushing out content. So I think it's an important point.
Absolutely. I think you've got to build all of this from, you've got to have very, very tight feedback loops across your business, not just now, forever. And that's how you iteratively improve. And the compounded returns will see you really build an exceptional business that stands the test of time. And circumstances have changed, and you can't live in a world where you don't adjust and reassess or get a degree of reorientation and go, where are we at? What's going on again? But the conclusions from that don't necessarily have to be drastic changes for the sake of them. A lot of people are going, we need to do new things, let's just go and do it, but they don't understand why.
I agree.
To go, what's changed? Why does that matter? What impact is that going to have? What's our hypothesis? And how can we test that in, again, the leanest possible form? And it may end up being a webinar, a podcast, whatever it may be, but I think a lot of people that were so dead set on running events and doing conferences suddenly went, oh, we just need to translate it all online. But I don't think it's necessarily that straightforward.
No, I think actually in a lot of cases, in regards to maybe softwares that they've added or just, things that companies are doing, I think in a lot of cases now, it's actually a case of getting rid of a lot of, old strategies and old, maybe processes that they were doing, both in the physical kind of world and also in the digital world. rather than just adding, lots of new things and adding lots of new content and different features. It's probably a case now of just making things a bit more simple. And like you said, always working back from the customer, because at the end of the day, it's what they want. It's not what you want. It's not what's in your mind. It's really working back from, more importantly, what they want to hear. So I think it's a really important point for people to kind of listen to.
But I think through this period, not just for us and our customers, but many businesses, because it has been so polarizing, it's really made you question what matters. There's not so many shades of grey that kind of keep things in limbo. It's vital, not vital, vital, not vital. And so it's been quite liberating to cut out a lot of the noise and distractions. Now, you could cut it out temporarily and see what impact does that have. But all of a sudden things become very clearer. And having a singular focus will allow you to move fast, which is essential through this period.
Completely agree. Well, look, Daniel, it's been really, really awesome having you on the show. It's been, I think, a really interesting podcast just to listen to, both kind of, in the kind of early part around how you did the inbound side and both the ABM play, but also just, really how you've grown with Ebsta and how you've, kind of structured both on the strategy side, but also on the software side, that whole piece together. So it's been, I hope you've enjoyed coming on, but it's been a really, really great podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
No, absolutely, Joe. It's been a pleasure being on here. Big fan of what you guys are doing, and hopefully some value there. My unique perspective of perhaps being a product person that's evolved into marketing and all-out growth hopefully resonates with people. And always happy to have conversations. So if people want to get in touch, just drop me an email at daniel@ebsta.com and we can continue a conversation.
Awesome. Well, guys, I will see you on the next episode of the CDP Growth Show. See ya.